All right, this is Getting Schooled. Hopefully you can hear me. We'll get started here in just a few seconds. Let me make sure the audio's working and get everything loaded up here on the other page. As always, let me know where you're writing from or watching from today. And also, you can let me know. I do have a couple ideas, but tomorrow we'll be talking about extreme heat. And also the rest of the time will be up to you guys. So if there's some other topic that we haven't discussed that you want to learn more about, or maybe we have discussed it, or maybe you missed it, but you just want to go back over it again, give me some ideas and let me know, and we'll go from there. So it looks good. Looks like the audio is working here, and let me just refresh things here, and I'll pull it up. That way I can see your comments as we get going here. But today it is all about tropical weather. So hurricanes, tropical weather, and it actually is going to work out pretty well because there's Tropical Storm Arthur that's already stirring up off of the Atlantic coastline. So again, this is Getting Schooled, and I'm meteorologist Ross Ellett, and one of the 13 ABC meteorologists here. So if you're maybe watching somewhere else across the country and you're not quite familiar with me, it's a little bit about my background. So this is week number 9 and the 26th episode of Getting Schooled. By the way, if you've missed some, and I can imagine that possibly being the case, we've got all of these broadcasts that we've done is up on our YouTube page. So if you go to YouTube, put in 13 ABC, you may have to scroll through there, but you'll be able to find not only this episode when we're done with it, but the other 25 episodes that we've already got that are already done and they're already posted there. So here's a look. Yesterday we talked about changing seasons. Today it's all about hurricanes and tropical weather. Tomorrow, extreme heat and anything else that you want to talk about. I've carved out some time here that we'll talk about extreme heat and the summer season, but also anything else that you guys want to talk about, and hopefully we'll get some more feedback. So let me know if there is something in particular you definitely want to talk about. Hello, JD. Good to see you there again. I think you've been on every single one of these, so good to see you once again here. And Tony from North Baltimore. Anyways, let's get started. Let's talk about hurricanes and the changing seasons all together. So we'll go over to the big board. This is a look at a satellite image here from a big hurricane. This is just a few years ago. I believe it was Hurricane Maria as it was heading off towards Puerto Rico. You can see the eye of that storm. If you look close enough, right in the middle of it, this was a major hurricane. Category 5, large setup altogether. So let's get right to it on basically why we have hurricanes that form at all. And tropical weather is completely different than what we typically use. All right, so there's a scale, just like we have an EF scale or an F scale for tornadoes that measures basically how destructive those storms are. We've also got a scale for hurricanes too. And it has to do with, there's several different categories and threat levels when it comes to hurricanes. And we've got several up here on this board, but we've got storm surge here towards the top, and the bigger the hurricane, the more storm surge and flooding potential there can be. Now today, we've been talking about lakeshore flooding. We've had a lot of rain, and we've got strong winds coming off of Lake Erie that are moving out of the east. And essentially what's happening is those winds, as they push towards the lake, it's trying to push up these wall of water, and it's coming towards the lakeshore. This is kind of what a storm surge is, in that you get all these winds that's kind of pushing and leading to this big wall of water moving inland. Now, the lakeshore is dealing with water maybe 3-4 feet above where it could be. We had lower water levels, and if we didn't have those easterly winds altogether. You look at the storm surge, and you're talking about 6 feet, 9 feet, 13 feet, maybe 20 feet. Storm surge. That is a huge problem, and that's on top of the normal waves that a hurricane is going to throw up. Then you've got the different levels here. Category 5 is labeled as catastrophic. You got extreme, extensive, moderate, minimal damage. Let me put it this way. I mean, minimal damage is still going to lead to damage, but at least it's not as extensive. It's not going to tear down homes. And so usually with a Category 1 storm, you'll see people that ride out those storms with that. Category 5, that's a different story. You really got to get out of there because it's going to level everything. You got the air pressure at the bottom of the screen, which may be a little more difficult for you to understand. But on the side of the scale here, you have the wind speeds. And so for a Category 1 storm, you're usually talking about 75 mile per hour winds. You get up to a Category 2 storm, about 100 mile per hour winds, and then a 3, you're over about 115 or so. And then a Category 5 storm, well, if you're over 156 miles per hour, sustained winds is what you're looking at. That does a tremendous amount of damage. One question we get all the time, what is worse? Is it a hurricane or a tornado? And a tornado is still worse where the tornado goes through, but that's on a very small scale. That might impact a few homes, or maybe rip up a path a mile long, but only 100 yards wide. A hurricane impacts hundreds and hundreds of miles and does a tremendous amount of damage overall. So it does much more damage on the overall scale. This is a look at 2005 was a particularly active hurricane season, remarkably active. In fact, on this particular year, we essentially ran through all the different names that were out there. In fact, we ran through all the names that were in place here. And after that, we ended up having to go back and go to the Greek alphabet, which was the first time that had happened. So every year we get a list of these names. Well, we went through all of them in this given year, 2005. But you can see they were all over the place, these hurricanes were. But there was this couple common paths. One was these storms kind of going a little bit farther south and getting into the Gulf of Mexico and moving up like that, and we can be impacted by it. A lot of times these storms also went a little bit further north, got close to Florida, either hit Florida or then kind of turned around and came up and were able to get close to the Carolinas. And then you had a lot of these storms that just kind of went off and didn't impact the United States at all. But this was generally, these are very common storm tracks that we see, but you can see these hurricanes can go just about anywhere. And in that particular year, there was a lot of them. All right, this is a look at hurricanes over the years, the number of tropical storms and hurricanes from 1950 to 2015. And 2005 in particular, the year that I just showed there, well, this is where you're at. You're all the way at the top of that scale. It was a very, very unusual year for us with all those storms that moved through. Never really seen a hurricane season like it. There were a lot of hurricanes, a lot of damage to the United States coastline. Even 2004 was a really bad year too. Both of those years are pretty rough. But then if you kind of take those years out, especially 2005 year, which is really bizarre, there really hasn't been a whole lot of change here on how many hurricanes and tropical storms we've had per year. It's been pretty consistent, but there are years where it's down and there are years where it's up. And we talked about El Nino and La Nina and how that temperature impacts the waters, and there's a lot that goes into that for hurricane forecasting too. Because if you get an El Nino or La Nina year, it can really impact the jet stream, and the jet stream really impacting the amount of hurricanes that form, that take place. This is a look at the hurricane season. So let me try to break this down. The top of the scale here, we've got, this is May 10th, okay? May 10th, and we're just past that. This is where we're at on the scale right now. Virtually nothing. It is very, very uncommon to get any storms this time of the season. And yet, we've got one. Tropical Storm Arthur, which we'll talk more about, is out there churning off the northeast coastline. June 1st, nothing, hardly at all. There's very little usually that takes place. But that's the official start to the hurricane season is June 1st. But then even going into July, these numbers are really, really low. They don't really start to go up until we get into August. So here's August 1st, and we start to go up on that curve. We start to go up on that peak. And look how we just end up shooting up here to about September 10th to about September 15th. And that is the peak right at the top of hurricane season. And red is tropical storms, yellow is the amount of hurricanes, and both of them peaking at about the same time. And then as we go beyond that, it begins to fall. And then yet in the middle of October, there's another noticeable peak that happens. And it seems like clockwork, right when you think, oh, that's it, hurricane season's over, we get these storms that start to fire up right in the middle part of October. And then things begin to slide away as we get later into November. Now, why would you think that the tropical season would be so much later? It's not in the middle of summer. It's more late summer into fall. Well, there's a big reason why. And it comes down to the temperature of the water. And at some point, I know we've talked about this a little bit in the weeks prior, but water takes a long time to heat up and takes a long time to cool down. So all summer long, we're getting this bright sunshine over the ocean, and that sunshine is just warming things up, right? Warming it up, warming it up, warming it up, and those temperatures keep climbing. through June, through July, through August, and they don't reach their peak until we get into September, and some of that warmth is even lingering on here into October. And that's the fuel that is end up leading to these hurricanes. So all that sunshine all the way through the summer still isn't enough to really do a whole lot to the hurricanes here until we get late in the season. There's one other feature that really helps out too, and it's how hurricanes form. Hurricanes, they want warmth and that ocean water, and they want calm conditions. If you get a jet stream or strong winds aloft that moves in and interacts with a hurricane, it rips it to shreds. It doesn't work out at all. Jet stream, you get that with a severe weather outbreak, and it can help spawn a lot of tornadoes because it helps lead to the intense wind shear, which is that magical ingredient that takes a thunderstorm and begins to twist it and turns it into a severe thunderstorm. Not with hurricanes. You get the same environment with hurricanes, and all of a sudden the hurricane is gone. It's nothing more than just some random showers and thunderstorms, and that is it. So it's pretty impressive how much different this is. It also means that once hurricanes hit land, they run out of their fuel. Their fuel source is gone, and they weaken dramatically. So that's how hurricanes are forming. Again, here's a look at the Atlantic Ocean, and we've got our hurricane churning out here, okay? And as that hurricane is churning, again, if it runs into strong winds, that's it. It's done. A storm is gone. If that storm hits Florida, it's going to take a major hit and weaken significantly until it gets on the other side of it and gets out in the warm Gulf of Mexico, and then it can reform. Same thing if that storm ends up coming up the coastline and comes towards us. Once it finally gets inland, it loses that strength. It loses the winds. It still holds on to the rain, but it's not nearly as intense by the time it finally gets to us. Now, this is a look at some of the what we call spaghetti models, okay? I know we're getting close to lunchtime. How many of you guys like spaghetti? This is a look at what we call a spaghetti model when it comes to hurricanes, and they're a pretty common way of tracking them. You probably see them on TV, but you've got our hurricane here that's developed, and this is where the hurricane is at. And then you've got all these little lines that are spinning all over the place. Well, each one of those lines is a computer model that is taking the track of that storm and moving it towards wherever that computer model thinks that it's going. And notice as time goes on, so you get 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, now probably 5, 6, 7 days in the future, that area of where the storm could go all of a sudden begins to branch off in a pretty wide area. This is not uncommon at all. So in this case, the computer models are showing the storm potentially going to Bermuda and not having any impact on land to anywhere from Nova Scotia, New York, North Carolina, Virginia, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida were all potentially in the line of where the storm could end up going. But each one of those computer models helps forecasters get an idea of how confident they are where that storm may go. And if all of a sudden we start seeing all the computer models kind of point to Florida, then we know that we've got a big problem. And so this is one way. Computer models are a huge help with forecasters. Satellite does a great job. If we didn't have satellite, we wouldn't have the data for computer models to do anything at all. So all of this is certainly very helpful. Let me go over, and I want to show you guys a website here that if you're in, and it looks like we got some new information, so I'll bring that to you. We'll look at this together for the first time. But just the last update I had seen, we had Arthur was still a tropical storm. It doesn't look like that's the case anymore, so we'll get to the latest on that. But this is the National Hurricane Center. And if you have any interest in tropical storms or hurricanes or anything, this is a website that you want to go to because it's got everything on it. You're going to be set for the entire summer season if you want to track these hurricanes on your own and get an idea what's going on. You're going to have it right here on this website. This is good stuff. The other thing, too, that if you're into this stuff, and of course, Getting School we have today, we have tomorrow, and then after that, we're into the summer season. But the National Hurricane Center, right on the top of their website here, has offering hurricanes at home. What? Webinars for 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. I know that's a lot of you guys that are out there, and even if you're a 3rd grader or a 7th grader, or anywhere close to this, I know it'll be just fine. But they've got a lot of basically getting schooled opportunities and learning opportunities right here that all has to do with hurricanes. So you can find that on their webpage. By the way, there's 2 ways you can find this website that I'm on right now. You can either Google National Hurricane Center, okay, and you'll find it. It'll pop up right there at the top, National Hurricane Center, or I can give you the web address. It's www.nhc.gov. www.nhc.noaa.gov. So that's G-O-V. So www.nhc.noaa.gov. Or again, just Google National Hurricane Center and you'll be able to find it no problem. So this is the web page that you're going to see right when we open this up. And right at the top of the screen, we've got each of the oceans here that's surrounding the United States. It's Central Pacific, Eastern Pacific, and the Atlantic all right here. This is the Central Pacific. Here's Hawaii. Don't worry, Hawaii's fine. No hurricanes there. Eastern Pacific, this is California down to Mexico. It is not as common for us to get hurricanes in this part because, and we talked about this, I think it was last week or the week before, but we get these cold ocean currents that usually come down and keep the water cold here into the western part of the country. But sometimes you go far enough to the south and you still get some of these hurricanes that do form right down, mainly down into this area, just off of the coastline of Mexico. But anyways, you can go to that one. And the other one that is usually quite active during hurricane season is the Atlantic. We're not even a hurricane season yet. That starts on June 1st, and yet we've got this storm. So now Arthur is technically called a post-tropical cyclone. It is no longer a tropical storm. It is a post-tropical cyclone, has winds sustained at 60 miles per hour. Still a pretty good storm. So what is a post-tropical cyclone? Well, that means now it's not truly the same as what it was when it was a tropical storm. So a tropical storm or hurricane, it feeds off of warm ocean water temperatures. It's called a warm core system. It feeds off of warm ocean water temperatures. You can, I guess, think of it in that regard. The other storm systems that we typically deal with are totally different. Well, now this storm system has made the transition from a tropical storm to more of a combo, like a hybrid storm. It's got some features here of both a system here that would be dealing with post-tropical cyclone. It's kind of made that transition over to a typical storm system that we would see develop that would be on land, that would be here in Ohio or something along those lines. So I guess we could think of it as tropical storm, a tropical system, or a normal weather system. It's now got more resemblance to a normal weather system than it does a tropical system. So it's made a transition here. As it's gotten farther north, it's gotten colder. The storm has adapted and has tried to find a way to survive. So here's a look at where it is expected to go. It's basically done a loop. It's no longer any threat at all to the United States. It was down, actually it was on the other side of Florida. There was showers and storms that moved on the eastern side of the Florida, and then it intensified. They got some rain out here towards North Carolina, and now it's done one of these loops, and it's expected to continue to just do another circle and go away from the United States. So that's a look at this storm right now. Let me go back over to, I did show some of this, and this is kind of tough to see on this little map, but I was pointing out where these hurricanes can go. There's a lot of information on this website where you guys can see and track these hurricanes and learn all about them. But you can see some of the tracks here of where hurricanes typically go. Here, this is in the Atlantic. I pointed these out. This is Mexico. Usually they form close to Mexico, and then they move away from California. But they can get out close to Hawaii. Sometimes they can impact Hawaii when they get out that way. And at that point, they're moving from the east to west is typically the direction that they're moving. Let me go back up. They've got some neat stuff here that I could spend some time, definitely some time going over. We've got let's see. Here we go. Look at, now if you want to see a crazy map, how about we just take every tropical storm that we've had since data from 1949 in the Pacific and 1851 in the Atlantic. So we're going back, basically, we're talking 150, 170 years worth of tropical storms. I'll put them all on a map, and there you go. And if you look close enough, let me point out where we're at on this map. We're right here. And if you look, we've had several of these storms that have moved right overhead here for us, too. They bring a lot of rain, some wind. It's not a whole lot different than what we've got outside today, quite honestly. But you can see all the different tracks here. So there's a lot of different neat things on this website that you can go to. And here's a look at where these storms typically are during the season. So June, you see these storms typically develop close to Florida. The reason that would happen, it's really warm water there, so it's a little more likely Doesn't change a whole lot for July. Go to August, you can see that you've got more of these storms that develop a little bit closer all the way through the Caribbean. And then you get into September and October. These are the big months here. And the storms typically develop much closer to Africa, and the water is much warmer across the entire Atlantic Ocean. So these storms have a long ways to go here, and a lot of opportunity to really get fueled up. I have a feeling this question is going to come up here momentarily, so I want to point this out right now. In fact, I may just leave this up as we go to our questions here coming up. But the names, probably some of you are wanting to know why we have certain names for certain storms. This is done by a group. The World Meteorological Organization helps out a lot with this. This is not just something the United States does. So you have the United States, you've got all these Caribbean countries, you've got basically a lot of folks, a lot of these countries surrounding the Atlantic Ocean that has input on the different names that get used. The other thing too is that these names fluctuate. They go from a boy name to a girl name, boy name to a girl name. So this year we started off with Arthur, okay, right there. Now we're going to go to Bertha, will be the next one. Cristobal, I probably said that wrong. I'm sure I did. Then we have Dolly, and then we just go down the list. In 2021, next year, we started off with a boy name. This year, we're going to start off with a girl name, Anna, and then we'll go to Bill. So we'll have Hurricane Bill, Claudia, Danny. There's Fred in there. So you can see some of these names are pretty typical of what we would have, say, around the United States. We got a Teddy, we got a Sally, we got a Sam, Peter, Richard coming up. Let's see what else we have. Tammy, Harold, Franklin, Emily, Don, Cindy. Actually, there's a lot of names kind of in 2023 all linked together. But then you get some other ones that are maybe a little more difficult for us to say and are maybe more of have a Caribbean more of a Caribbean name to it. And you can see some of these are a little bit different. But this list goes from 2020 all the way to 2025. So again, it's all on this website too, if you want to look any of that information up. But anyways, I'll leave that up as we go to the questions for today. Let me know what questions you have, and if there's any other things that you want to talk about coming up for tomorrow, which will be our last day here. Let's see here. When did Hurricane Arthur start? So, well, it wasn't a hurricane, so let me back up there. Arthur was a tropical storm. I think 60-mile-per-hour winds, 65-mile-per-hour winds were the strongest that it got. 75-mile-per-hour winds would have been the highest here. Well, 75-mile-per-hour winds would have been the threshold that we would get to a hurricane. We never got to that point. But Arthur started, we had late last week, there was basically a cluster of storms that formed. And this is how hurricanes generally get going. It starts off as just an area where we have some showers and storms develop. It's as simple and as weak as that. And as they get developing over the warm ocean waters, if there's no wind around it, it's got warm ocean water temperatures to fuel off of. These showers and storms become numerous, and they just kind of keep going and going and going. And after a while, it begins to form a small area of low pressure. And if the conditions remain favorable, it continue to grow. So last week we noticed, I think it was, about this time last week, maybe around Wednesday, that it became obvious that there was a cluster of storms down there. It wasn't a tropical system or anything like that yet, but it looked like it was on its way to becoming one. We got into the weekend. It was a tropical storm at that point, and just within hours, it went from a tropical storm to now being classified as just a normal storm system with strong winds. So it's kind of made that leap over from a tropical system over to one that is no longer holding some of those characteristics to it. Let me know if there's any other questions that you've got when it comes to tropical storms or hurricanes, or if there's anything else extra that you want to talk about tomorrow. I did get, I believe it was JD asking about ice ages. I want to talk about that tomorrow, so I've got that written down. Extreme heat and the summer season, and then any other questions that you want to get to. So we'll get to that coming up for tomorrow. So let's see, what is the difference between a hurricane and a cyclone? Good question. So a cyclone is a storm system, and it's an area of low pressure that has got a storm system with it. So different now, when it comes to that term cyclone, there isn't anything real special with it. We call a lot of areas of low pressure cyclones. But when it comes to hurricanes, we call them hurricanes in this part of the country. As you get into parts of the Pacific that's close to Japan, they label them as typhoons or super typhoons. It's the same type of thing, but it's just a different name, different terminology. And then especially in the parts of the southern hemisphere, they refer to a lot of these storms as cyclones. So there are different names and different terms for basically the same thing, but there's nothing that's a whole lot different with it. Now, with that term there that said post-tropical cyclone, what they're trying to say is essentially this is no longer a tropical system anymore. It started to make the leap over here to something that is no longer in that tropical form. A storm surge, what is a storm surge? It's an area of the storm where the ocean water essentially piles up. And that storm surge reaches a max, essentially it would be on the eastern part, as a hurricane it's on the right side of the eye of the storm. So if a hurricane is moving towards, say, Florida from the east going to the west, then it would be on what is generally on the north side of that system. So if we're looking at a coastline, it's north to south, it would be on the northern side of that. If it was the Gulf Coast, which is west to east, it would be on the eastern side of it. But it's piling up that water as the winds keep rushing and rushing very strong towards the shoreline. And as that water piles up, essentially that wall of water just kind of moves inland and does a tremendous amount of damage. In fact, the storm surge many times can be the worst of the damage, more so than the wind and the rain. The rain can be quite terrible too, especially if these storms become more stationary. What was the most damaging hurricane in history? There are a couple different answers I can give to this one. There is a lot of history on this website at the National Hurricane Center if you want to learn more about it. But I'll give you two. We'll go with the Galveston hurricane that was in the early 1900s. This hurricane was tremendous because we didn't have the forecasting capability like we had today. As it came down into Texas initially, not only did it do a considerable amount of damage, but it also harmed a lot of people because there were a lot of people that were in the line of that hurricane. And as the storm surge came in, it did a lot of damage, and it just basically leveled Galveston. It also cut a path from Texas all the way up along the Mississippi River. And at that time, it essentially cut the communication lines in this country in half. It was no longer possible to basically telephone or telegraph over to the western part of the country because those lines were snapped, basically in a straight line all the way up until they were repaired. So that was tremendous. The other one was Hurricane Katrina. And that one did a considerable amount of damage too, not just in New Orleans where you hear all the stories of the flooding water that came in. That was horrible, but also in the Mississippi area as that storm came in. But I mean, we could also go to talk about even more recently Hurricane Harvey, which had a lot of damage with the storm, but had some of the most rainfall fall with that storm than any place that we've had recorded in United States history. And we're talking, for us, it would be like a year and a half's worth of rain that fell in one storm. So that was tremendous too. Looks like that's it. So tomorrow will be our last day again, and we'll get to that. Bring your questions tomorrow. Anything weather or science related, I'll do my best to answer them. So we'll look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow.